Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I, as always, am happy to be here with you for another episode, for another interview. As I mentioned at the end of the last episode, this is my first time interviewing more than one author at a time, so that was exciting. It's actually a mother-daughter duo, and mom is listed as the author, and then the story is about the daughter's journey through chronic illness and their journey together, trying to figure things out as they try to get an accurate diagnosis. And not only getting an accurate diagnosis, but also working through the teenage years together. So lots of different complications and layers. The book is called Dancing in the Narrows, A Mother-Daughter Odyssey Through Chronic Illness. The author is Anna Penenberg, and today I'm speaking with both Anna and Dana Penenberg about this book, about their experiences that led to this book. I was laughing as I was thinking about when I first was contacting them in terms of the interview to get them set up with the call-in information and the questions and everything like that. And I was emailing back and forth with Anna, and I asked how Dana pronounces her name, because I have a friend who pronounces it Dana, and I didn't want to, mispronounce the name. And then after I sent that, and Anna had responded saying she pronounces it Dana, I got to thinking, I didn't ask Anna how she pronounces her name. Is it Anna or Anna? And I was trying to figure out how to spell those phonetically. All I could think of was Anna from Frozen. And I was about to email Anna and say, do you pronounce your name like Anna from Frozen? When she emailed me and said, oh, and by the way, my name is pronounced Anna. And I was so grateful that I didn't have to express my brain freeze situation where I couldn't figure out how to spell Anna phonetically, even though it's really not hard. Anyway, some days are like that. Others are also like that. Let me go ahead and give you the description on the back of the book. Dancing in the Narrows chronicles a mother and daughter's multi-year journey through illness and trauma. At 16, Anna's younger daughter, Dana, is stricken with a mysterious and debilitating condition, eventually diagnosed as Lyme disease. Desperate to find a cure, the two women are thrust into the established medical world, then far beyond. Full of adventure, humor, and blind faith, Dancing in the Narrows is an inspiring story of self-discovery as a single mother fights to save the life of her child. So even before we talk to Anna and Dana, just from reading that description, you can only imagine what this duo went through. I mean, first, think of it from Anna's perspective. Her teenage daughter is struck with an illness. They have trouble diagnosing it. She's sick all the time. It's getting worse. They can't find answers. It had to have been incredibly scary and stressful. She's trying to raise two daughters, so she's trying to take care of the one who's chronically ill. She's also trying to give attention and time to the one who's not chronically ill, and that can lead to family dynamics that are not always easy. And then I think of it from Dana's perspective. She is a teenager. She is 16. She's supposed to be thinking about rebelling against her parents and rules, and learning to drive and going to dances, or whatever you're doing in terms of being a normal teenager, being a rebellious teenager, being a teenager in general. And she's having to also go through this. Her body is going through crazy changes. They can't figure out what it is. She's sick. When I think of it from either perspective, it sounds so difficult. Even when I think of it from Anna's older daughter's perspective, I think how difficult this experience must have been for the whole family. At any rate, that is the book, and it's really lovingly written, as you would imagine. It's got humor, it's got the journeys that you would expect a mother and daughter might go through. There's some surprises, and it's just a really lovely memoir of this very difficult time in their life. So let's go ahead now and turn to the interview. Again, it's Anna Penenberg and her daughter, Dana Penenberg. The book is Dancing in the Narrows, A Mother-Daughter Odyssey Through Chronic Illness.
Hi, Anna. Hi, Dana. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, I'm excited to have both of you here, and we are here to talk about the book Dancing in the Narrows, A Mother-Daughter Odyssey Through Chronic Illness. Before we get to the book, though, if each of you could share a little bit about yourselves, that would be great.
Yes, I'll start. I'm Anna, and I live in Topanga, California. I'm a mother of 2 daughters, and I see myself as a highly trained, self-made healer. I have, certifications as a psychotherapist, marriage and family therapy, training in somatic healing arts, body, mind centering, and infant developmental movement, and I'm a yoga teacher. So I have a combination of modalities that I use in my expertise as a clinician, and really tailor my work with each person. So I have done a lot of work with trauma as before my story began, and in the story that's in my memoir here, and learned a lot during that whole time period with my daughters, and so that's me. And Dana?
Yeah, so I also live nearby in Los Angeles. At this point, I'm 30 years old. In the book, I'm a teenager, and I work as a spiritual transformational coach, and I also have a combination of modalities that I use. I'm trained in craniosacral and energy healing, and I also do deep somatic healing work, which helps the body unwind from trauma as well. And I'm also a birth doula, so I tailor all these things to the individual and try to bring them into the birth process. Other things I like to do are hike and enjoy time with family here in LA.
So, as I said, the book is called Dancing in the Narrows, A Mother-Daughter Odyssey Through Chronic Illness. Anna, you are listed as the author, but it's really about your story and Dana's story. So can you give an overview of the story that you share in this memoir?
Yes. So sometimes Dana and I see this as a dark night of the soul, where we learned a lot and it led us to our gifts. And you'll hear more about that. And so this is a time in my life where I was a single mother raising 2 daughters and entering high school. And the youngest, who's Dana, with me today, was 16. She came down with a mysterious illness, and it took 1.5 years for us to discover that it was Lyme disease. And at that, it was actually chronic Lyme disease, so very much deep in her system and difficult to treat. So I thought what looked like a flu or mononucleosis or many other diagnoses that we got went on for 12 years total. The book is 8 years of that journey, and how we made we made it through and how we made decisions and the adventures we went on in discovering what was her healing path. And so the book has a lot of humor, adventure, and self-discovery.
It really is about that journey, and I also have a dear friend from grad school who has Lyme disease, and it took a long time for her to get the diagnosis as well. So that can be part of the problem, is just trying to figure out what is going on. To find a diagnosis, to find a treatment plan. What inspired you then to write the memoir down, not only for yourselves but for publication?
At present, the CDC reports 476,000 cases of Lyme disease per year, which it just moved up from 300,000. So there are a lot of people affected by this. Dan and I were talking the other day, and it felt to us like we were very alone. And we were alone in deciding what to do and how to work with the treatments, the various treatments that were being used at the time and tried, and how to also explore things that were beyond the medical pharmaceutical treatments. And so dear to my heart, and the journey that we kept at and did very well with, it felt like I wanted to give something back to the Lyme community and basically anyone dealing with a strong challenge in their family. So I did intrinsically write this to see what happened to me and to learn from it. It was kind of ironic because my book came out 3 months into the pandemic, and not only did everything change in the book world, such as no going to bookstores and having interviews and in person, suddenly I could actually speak to a library in Pennsylvania and get interviewed everywhere, which was great. But what was interesting was I soon realized that the nature of our journey and our story is very relevant to the general public in this way, because we are all dealing with a health issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is interesting that it came out 3 months into the pandemic, when everybody was kind of dealing with new normals.
Yeah.
So reading someone else's story that isn't necessarily, not necessarily, it isn't related to the pandemic, but it talks about your story of trying to figure out your new normals and how to best manage everything going on in your lives. Can you talk about the process of turning the story, your family's experiences, into this book?
Well, when Dana first became ill and we had no idea what it was and how long this would even take, our lives had changed so much just to start with. She couldn't go to school, and all kinds of things changed, environmental sensitivities, sound and light, and how that made our lives very nuclear in the home. And so I started thinking, this is really drastic. I think we should make a documentary. But given that I have no training in making films, and the one high school student that we knew that has now become, a producer, he was not very, he didn't really show up to do it. So I had been writing in my journals and for many years, and there's a story about that in the book at the end, where a longtime journal of mine gets rediscovered from when I was 13. And so I, at some point into the 8 years that I write about, I decided to really write scenes and use my journals so that I could keep up with all the different things that had been happening. And that's how it became Dancing in the Narrows.
Let's go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking about the name, Dancing in the Narrows, and what is the story behind the name of the book. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Today I am speaking with mother and daughter, Anna and Dana Penenberg. The book, as you know, is called Dancing in the Narrows. Let's go ahead and return now to that interview.
Speaking of Dancing in the Narrows, can you say where the name of the book came from?
Yeah, so there is a story in the book that is a time that I took a break from taking care of Dana and got some help and went on this hiking journey that I had seen on the internet, which was hiking in Zion National Park, where you actually trek through the Virgin River. And what's so stunning about it and what caught my attention was that it just looked so inspiring and almost like infused with the light of God as the sun came down through these very narrow canyon walls that are 2,000 feet high. And I just felt like I needed to go do that. So I signed up for a hiking trip for a week and went there. And so that's a literal story in the book. But the metaphor of the Narrows is really any challenge that takes you for, a ride or a trek, and that you need to come out the other side.
Absolutely, and sometimes you need to find the space to dance during those times. You know, it's not always heartbreak and trauma, although that's part of it. But there can be joy and dancing during those times as well. So Anna, you are listed as the author. Obviously, though, the story is a mother-daughter relationship, and your journey through your experience. So, Dana, how involved were you in the writing process? How did you feel about your mom saying we should make this a documentary or we should write a memoir, or however that came about? How did you feel about that process, and how involved were you in the writing of the book?
I fully supported her, and that was one of the ways that she survived what we were going through, and it was such a strange and lonely time, and that was an outlet that she found, and she, as she said, she's always been a journaler, and then she started kind of escaping to writing classes and crafting what she was writing anyway, and I remember too, we just had stacks and stacks of like medical records and history, and she kept track of all that stuff. And I was pretty hands off and just involved in what we were going through day to day. And then when I was in college, when she had the first draft of her manuscript, I read through the whole thing, and I gave her notes and feedback, and then I trusted her to craft the rest of it because she's so talented, and she writes it so honestly and respectfully. And so I honored it as her process and her story.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. The teenage years are hard enough as mother and daughter. How did going through your teenage years, but also having to navigate all of the medical issues and the diagnosis and figuring out a treatment plan, how is that for both of you?
It was devastating, confusing. It was insanity. And I mean, thinking, if anybody thinks about that time of adolescence, you've got hormones and moods, and you just, want to do your own thing, and you want to separate from your parents. And suddenly I am like, I can't get out of bed, and I need my mom for everything. And I'm like, what is happening to my body? That was very confusing, especially as a woman, and kind of embarrassing that I lost control of my body. So yeah, it was very confusing, but it did ultimately, it really tested us and strengthened our bond, because we had to get creative, and we had to find a way to stick together because the odds were kind of against us.
So from the mother perspective, I would say that I'm looking at a teenager who's ready to test her wings a little bit and act out, and she couldn't. She had just started to figure out alcohol, apparently, I found out. And but at that time, she got so sick and her symptoms were so debilitating that she actually couldn't go to school, which we thought would just be one term. And she then did go to school, but she was kind of coming and going. And Dana has grown into an amazing young woman, and might recall this, but I do. She was wearing black, and she was mad, and she didn't want to deal with me. And meanwhile, as time progressed and we weren't getting any results in treating her, we kind of had to come to a crisis and make a decision. And that's in my book is a pivotal moment where it was going to be like, yes, this is awful and it's horrible and we don't have a choice, but we do have a choice to be a team and figure it out. And that was my thing. And that was one of the few times I really yelled at her.
I'm smiling because, you know, she said she was wearing black and very angry and well, yeah, she had a lot to be angry about, but at the same time she was also a teenager, and you know, a lot of teenagers, whether they're going through a health crisis or not, go through that same phase. So, you know, in some ways it was perfectly normal, and in other ways it was absolutely not normal for you both.
Yes, and I think there's something really important about that is carried through my book, which is that I always wanted to protect her becoming herself. And while she was robbed, really, of some of these ways in which she could push back and test herself, I still wanted her to have an experience of becoming who she was meant to be, not a person with an illness.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know a lot of people with chronic illnesses can struggle with that. You know, who am I? I'm not just this one thing. I am a whole person, and this is one aspect of me. So it's good that you were together and you were able to help each other through that time. Now, I know you also have an older daughter, Kayla, whom we talk about in the book. How was it for her in this process? You know, it can be hard to have a sibling who is going through something like this, who, you know, seemingly gets all the attention, those sorts of things. How was your relationship with her during this process?
Well, that is really a good question. Kayla struggled a lot. She was just in the throes of having her best year as a senior in high school. She wrote a one-act play that was being performed at the graduation the day before. And so she was very upset and angry and felt like she was losing a lot because her relationship with her sister had changed because Dana wasn't available to do things and didn't feel well. And then she went to college, but, you know, our life at home was very centered around what was helping Dana. And so, you know, she was rightfully in this juncture in her own growth and struggling with losing, you know, her sister. And so really, honestly, it wasn't until many years later that we really unpacked a lot of that trauma with her. And, you know, when Dana was well enough and everything was safe enough to do that.
Yeah, I can only imagine it's the difficulty it must have been just with everyone in relationships. So I'm happy to hear that you were able to work through some of that. The cover of the book has a butterfly on it, and the book starts with a story about a butterfly in your daughter's lives. Can you talk about the significance of the butterfly in this memoir?
Yes. That's a beautiful story, and it could almost be a child's book. It was an incredible experience when the girls were little, and we had this garden, and they found these caterpillars, and we got bug boxes, and so we had a very close relationship to a butterfly whose wing was folded and he couldn't fly. And so the metaphor of that is, how is it in a family, and what happens when someone has a disability that altered their life. And a butterfly is meant to fly, but we were helping it onto plants and helping it eat and having a relationship with it, which was such a unique moment in our relationship to the natural world. And I feel like it informed a lot of how I raised my kids to really be in relationship with the natural world. So, butterflies also have a process that is unlike any other creature of going into a chrysalis and transforming their bodies and coming back out. And there was actually a story in my book too, where we go across the country where I was assisting in a training, and we stayed on this farm, and we didn't know this, but she was raising butterflies. And so there were these photographs of chrysalises and beautiful moments where the butterfly is starting to emerge in this little room that Dana was staying in. And it was so fortuitous in a way. So that has a lot of significance for us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for that. I also wanted to ask you about the quotes at the beginning of each chapter. Are those quotes that you found for the book, or were those quotes that you already had that maybe had that you'd read somewhere and had kind of inspired you, or you liked them, or how did you choose the quotes at the beginning of each chapter?
Yes, actually, I did. There were quotes that I liked, but I went on a search for something that really encapsulated the theme of the chapter and found some amazing quotes. So, yeah, that was great.
We're going to take our second break of the podcast, but I will say that I always enjoy when there are quotes at the beginnings of chapters or books. Often I find myself saying, oh, right, I love that author or that person or what that quote is referring to. Other times I'll think, oh, that's a beautiful quote. I don't know much about that person. Maybe I should look more into that. So I just appreciate quotes, and of course, I don't always have time to actually look into the people. I think, oh, that's interesting, I should look into that person. But it's a nice thought, and I enjoy adding to my never-ending list of things to read. So it's all good. When we come back, we're going to be talking about Dana and Anna's current careers and how their experiences in this book, Dancing in the Narrows, may or may not have affected those career paths. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Today with Anna and Dana Penenberg. The book is called Dancing in the Narrows. Let's get back to that interview.
Mm-hmm. You both mentioned at the beginning your current careers and your experiences as healers. And Dana, you said you're a birth doula. Can you talk about your experiences with this disease and with the process of finding treatment that either, Dana, I would imagine it influenced maybe your path, your career path, and Anna, were you already a healer before this, or just both of you? If both of you could talk about that experience in your life and how it's been either affected by or how it affected your experience with Lyme disease.
Sure, I'll start. Let's see. There's so much in that, but my journey in healing, my father on the one hand, he's in the Western medical world. He's a surgeon at one of the best hospitals in the country. My mother brought me up on organic food and homeopathy and herbs. So I had influences of kind of the best of Western medicine and also my upbringing in holistic modalities as well as Kundalini yoga. And so when I got sick, it sort of defied everything we had in our toolbox. And I was sent to the best medical specialist in the country, and the best they could offer me was medication. And my mom and I are really passionate about getting to the root cause and unraveling this thing and not becoming a permanently debilitated sick person the rest of my life. And so that was what we valued, and that's what we kept pursuing. And so we didn't settle for just the medication, and we kept trying things and learning. But I came to what I do now because there was a lot of resisting of the illness and the way my life was going. But once I stopped resisting and I started listening and sort of letting it teach me, that it brought me to my teachers. And one of them is Gary Strauss, and I was on his table. He's a craniosacral practitioner. I was on his table for over a decade. And it's a completely different paradigm. And it was somewhere that everywhere else I went, it was like I was told what was wrong with me and what needed to be fixed. And every time I went to see him, he related to me at the soul level and kind of related to the inherent intelligence of my system. And I didn't really know that that's what he was doing. But I knew that I just felt good there. And so, later, after college, I went back and studied with him. And in the pursuit of studying, I studied with him. I also studied with a teacher and went through Reiki master certification. And I found her kind of fortuitously while I was interning in New York, and she had also dealt with chronic Lyme disease. And so all these pieces started coming together, and I found my teachers. And through my study, I healed at a whole other level, and then was able to start sharing that. And then my work, combining different modalities over time and doing session work, that it kept leading me back to birth. That many things people would come to me for, I could trace it back to events at birth. And I started studying pre- and perinatal psychology with Annie Brooke. And she was somebody that I had seen like over a decade prior as well. So I circled back around to her, and then I also circled back to studying more Kundalini, which is kind of what I was born into. My mom was doing it when she was pregnant with me. So I collected all these pieces that resonated for me and really worked for me. And then bringing in the doula work because of the profound healing of birth that I was experiencing, that I wanted to be able to be there. So that's kind of what I'll say for now about how I arrived at what I do. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because it's really lovely how you were able to take parts of what was not an easy time in your life and turn it into, not only a career path, but a way of healing others and sharing your knowledge and your gifts with other people. So I think that's wonderful.
Thank you.
And I would add that as from my perspective, as we went on this journey, I used a lot of the tools that I had, and there was quite a period of time when Dana wasn't, because of Lyme, affects your ability to think clearly and to function in certain ways. And so I really made the decisions and tried to respect the wisdom of her body and its intelligence. But at some point I was really happy that I could pass that to her, and she would then guide the process of what we were doing and when it was working and when it wasn't working. And so that was a process of the, as Dana likes to call it, the not the regular university, but the university of life, where we got a huge education in paying attention to what is the body needing and what is out of balance? And with these questions and with the respect that the wisdom of the body is available and will help you in healing from anything. And so that was kind of our focus.
Thank you both. I appreciate that. What, for both of you, is and was important about sharing the mother-daughter relationship in this book?
I'm going to read, actually, the quote that's on the back of my book, because I think that it says a number of things. So this is the quote. Being with Dana was blissful at times. It felt like we were bonding in ways most mothers and daughters never do, a silent rhythm of glory and guts. Our hearts grew warmer in each other's presence, and we shared a vast fear no one else could grasp. We held on to each other against the world. And so what I would say is that there are probably many unique circumstances in mother-daughter relationships. And I think they're worthy of hearing, because those daughters become something quite amazing out of these supportive relationships. And there aren't the mother-daughter stories that I've read that are published in books are typically about an ill child, and it's the mother speaking. And I feel like our relationship was kind of a transformational evolution of her growth into an adult. And I think that's a very worthy thing to read about, not just as a coming of age story, but as a sort of growing into your soul path.
Dana, do you have anything to add from the perspective of the daughter in the book?
I'm not sure. I mean, I agree with everything that my mom just shared. And I think that she writes this in a really unique way, and that there aren't many books out there showing a strong mother-daughter bond like this, and with the amount of kind of bravery and trust. The one example that I think kind of resonates with our story is Beautiful Boy. And when I saw that, I felt like, oh, that's the kind of bond that I have with my mom. And so I hadn't seen anything out there that showed something similar to what we have. And the way that she writes it too, where she's showing what's happening in real time with me coming of age and then flashing back to scenes from her early 20s and her coming of age and growing up, and that it's sort of us side by side growing into womanhood.
Thank you both for that. What is it that you would hope readers might take away from the book?
I just want to add to that it's kind of Thelma and Louise meets Lady Bird. And what I hope readers would take away from the book is understanding that they can create their own health, advocate for themselves. I hope they'll take away in times that are challenging, that you still can experience joy and adventure and find your way.
We're about to take our last break of the podcast, but I do want to say that I really appreciate when people can write a story like this, when they can recognize the joy even through difficult times, even through painful times. Maybe they didn't always recognize those times when they were happening. Maybe they did. Some people are really good at recognizing that. But being able to look back and recognize times of joy, even in those darker parts of our life, I think is really wonderful and can be really inspiring. And so when I read memoirs like this, I'm just grateful that people choose to share those experiences so that we can see that there is joy, that there is love, there is laughter, all of those things, even when we are experiencing times that are not so easy to deal with. So, like I said, we're going to take that last break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking a little bit more about Anna's writing and if she's going to write another memoir. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Of my interview with Anna and Dana Penenberg. Let's get right back to it.
Anna, you have always written in journals, so you've written pretty much your whole life, it sounds like. This is a pretty specific topic and a story for your first book, but do you think you might want to write other books?
I'm working on another memoir that pretty much starts where I left off in Dancing in the Narrows. It's kind of about digging into other aspects of family, ongoing life, new love, partnership. What am I succeeding at after this compelling chapter of parenthood and the like? So.
Fun. That sounds great and a good follow up, not only for a book but for you as an author. Do you have advice for anyone who might want to chronicle a similar journey or to write a memoir, maybe similar to your story?
I would write from passion. What is the most compelling thing for you to talk about and to show and to reveal the deep parts of what moves you and what you experienced? And after those get on the page, then you'll figure out how the story will come together. But inspiration is really the place to write from.
Yep, absolutely. I am nosy, and I always ask people what they're reading. So, Dana, do you have favorite authors or genres when you take time to read?
Not off the top of my head that I can think about. I read a lot of books on the body, and so some of my favorites are, I guess that's what I would say. Some of my favorites are the writers who talk deeply about the body. Emily Conrad and her book. Her book is called Life on Land, and it's a very deep journey into the body and some of the movement modalities that she developed through her own journey.
All right, thank you. Anna, how about you? Favorite authors or genres that you like to read?
I'm reading a lot of memoirs typically, and I found some amazing authors at my press, which is She Writes Press. Some really well-written memoirs there. And Dana's actually reading this too, but I recently read Greenlight's Matthew McConaughey's book, and just delighted in the whole way in which it was written, and written from life experience and notes and journals and pieces of things that he wrote on napkins. And it's fun and engaging, and it's a strong story. So that's been great.
Thank you both. Anna, I know you have a website, so can you please share the website and where people might be able to interact with you on social media if you have an author presence on social media?
Yes, my website is Anna, ANNA, Penenberg, PENENBERG.com, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram as Anna Penenberg Author.
Well, Anna and Dana, we have talked about a lot of different things today, but is there anything that we haven't covered that either of you really wanted to bring up about the book or writing or your experiences together as mother and daughter through this journey? Is there anything that we haven't covered?
I would like to share that I think what's really powerful about this story coming out is that at the time that we were going through it, it was very much uncharted territory, and that we felt like we were the only ones, or, there wasn't much known about what we were going through yet. And so if there was something out there that we could relate to, we just grabbed for it. So I think this is the kind of thing that would have helped us make it through, and helped us know that we weren't alone, and it's possible to kind of survive this and maintain your relationship through this. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah. Anna, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say I'd love for you to come on the journey of dancing in the Narrows and find your own inspiration for your life, and take good care.
Thank you. And I just noticed the Post-it note that I had sitting next to me that I'd written down a quote. It's from the end of the book. And Anna, you wrote, "I knew I couldn't break my own heart and save Dana's life at the same time." Do you want to talk a little bit about that quote, or what it means to you?
Yes, I think it's really about how I worked with myself, so that I wouldn't emotionally or physically be too depleted to stay positive and engaging and helpful with my daughter. So there was, I think, probably most mothers have this bone in their body where they would do anything to save their child, and that's what that quote is talking about.
Thank you. And thank you both so much for taking the time out of your weekend to talk to me about the book. Again, it's called Dancing in the Narrows, a mother-daughter Odyssey through chronicle illness. I really appreciate both of you coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you for having us.
I was a bad host and stepped on Dana's thank you there at the end. Dana, I apologize. But I do want to thank Anna and Dana both for joining me to talk about this book. It was wonderful to hear both of their perspectives, mother and daughter, and how it was writing the book for Anna, how it was having your mother write a book, from Dana's perspective. I really appreciated all of that. So thank you to both of them. If you are a fan of memoirs, then you should definitely check this book out. If you're interested in reading about mother-daughter relationships or chronic illness, etc., then again, you should definitely check out this book. I kept thinking of a very good friend of mine who also has Lyme disease and has had that for probably 15 years. I'm trying to think of how long I've known her, but she's had it for over 10, and the struggles that she's had and the way she's learned to deal with them and to cope with them. And it was it was helpful for me to read about Anna and Dana's experiences because it helped me to even better understand my friend's experience. Even though I've talked to her about it and she's shared things with me, it was nice to read a different perspective and know someone else's journey through that experience. So I'm grateful for Anna and Dana for sharing their stories. Thank you, as always, to you, my listeners. You know that I am so appreciative of you. I hope that you will join me for the next episode. I will be speaking with author Paul Russell Semendinger about his novel, Scattering the Ashes. It is a novel, but it reads a lot like a memoir. This time it is kind of a father-son. It's not a memoir, it's a novel, but it kind of reads in some ways like a father-son memoir with a twist. I'll get to that next week. We won't talk about the twist now. I'll make you wait on the next episode. So again, that book is called Scattering the Ashes by Paul Russell Semendinger, and I hope you'll join me for that interview. In the meantime, if you are a fan of this podcast, as always, I'm going to send out my plea for you to hit that subscribe button. Write us a review, leave us a 5-star review, which whatever's in it for you, in your heart to do is very greatly appreciated. It all helps to get the podcast out to more listeners such as yourselves. So hit subscribe, write a review, follow us on social media. You can find us on GSMC Book Review, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I would love to hear from you, hear your thoughts on some of the books that we've talked about. I don't know who the we is. I do this at the end every time, don't I? Some of the books I've talked about, some of the authors I've spoken with, what books you're reading. You know I love hearing from listeners, so hit me up on social media. I would be happy to chat. Hope you are having a great week. Hope that great week continues, but I really, really hope that no matter what's going on for you in your life right now, that you find plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.